Welcome to another insightful episode, and in particular, exciting episode of Me and My Health Up with your host, Anthony Harcher, a healthy man, according to my children, aka clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today we'll be chatting with the number one international bestseller co-author of What the Hell Do We Do Now? Mental health expert and strategist, clinical specialist, trainer, facilitator, certified resilience coach, Mark Butler. Drum roll, bing, 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 bing. And we're talking about stigma and mental health. Mark helps leaders to be able to talk about mental health in a meaningful way. Combining his clinical and commercial experience, Mark works to upskill leaders to promote open and caring conversations, create psychological safe spaces, effectively reduce stigma around mental health, and get in front of those issues that hinder peak performance. So, welcome, Mark Butler. How are you today?
Very good indeed. Thanks, Anthony. How are you? That was a mouthful. Sorry about that. I should have probably edited my bio a little bit.
It's
Didn't
okay.
really well.
It says I think the words yeah. Anyway, we'll be chatting more about how experienced you are in this
Sure.
field, and how
Sure.
much you've been able to help society and companies and individuals better their mental health. So I'm really keen to get started, and I think we best to start with the question I always ask my guests is, how have you arrived at what you are doing today? I'd love to hear your story.
Cool. Okay. Well, so as you alluded to in my bio, I've 25 years. Sorry, there's just a load of noise outside. Can you hear that, or is
No,
it all right?
no, it's
Okay,
yeah,
you
yeah,
can edit. All right. Okay.
yeah.
25 years or more corporate and commercial experience. I worked in international organizations as well as smaller individual independent organizations in the area mostly of entertainment, film and television, that sort of a space. I worked for Richard Branson back in the very late 80s, early 90s. His approach to work-life balance was decades ahead of its time. Prior to that, it was, you're at your desk at 9 a.m., et cetera, et cetera. But his line was always, look, I don't care when you work, as long as the work gets done. And so I was able to experience what that was like. And then went from that then into international space, working for international Hollywood studios, et cetera. When you're awake, you're working, that kind of a mentality. I experienced some burnout. I was sales director for an organization way back then. A budget of $1 million a day, sort of thing. So it was high pressure, high stakes stuff. But my learning from that experience of burnout was I went and studied some mental health, just kind of a personal journey. But I followed my nose, and I've ended up here now. A couple of master's degrees, a bunch of other qualifications, and I work in the clinical space as much as I do working in the corporate space. So I do a lot of strategy, building strategic plans and processes for organizations large and small around the globe. And but at the same time, I also still keep my hand in the clinical space. I think that's where I'm most alive. I think is working with somebody who is struggling and needing a guiding hand, if you like. And so I do that as the clinical director of a high-end, highly discreet, exclusive facility up here in the Northern Rivers. And at the same time, do quite a bit of pro bono work with veterans of PTSD and substance abuse and that. So that's kind of, so when you read out my bio, yeah, I now that I listen to myself, I've got fingers in a number of pies and yeah, pretty busy. So that's how I've ended up here. Lived
Yeah,
experience, and wanted to do a bit more with it and not just sort of have it my journey, help it to be others as well.
that's fantastic. How how you experience some burnout, some mental health challenges, and so you thought about how can I correct this? And now you're out there educating others and supporting others so that they essentially prevent the burnout or the mental health challenge or struggles, or
Yeah.
those that are experiencing that can, how can, I guess, the workplace create a space that they can come forward and seek help. And that's pretty much where I wanted to, have a chat to you today about is that stigma that's so strongly attached to mental health, and it's embedded in our fabric as a society that we can't express vulnerability. If we express vulnerability, we're weak.
Yeah.
And we need to put on a strong front even though if we're struggling. And that, as from your own personal experience, and I can vouch from my personal experience, that's not the best approach to I guess recovering from a mental health challenge. And the statistics will show that majority of people will experience during their lifetime a mental health challenge. So really keen to explore this topic of stigma, vulnerability, and first of all, what is it? Why is it so problematic? And I guess thirdly, what can we do about it to change this stigma associated with mental health?
Sure. Yeah, look, stigma is a really interesting area, because we can also, when we talk about stigma, we talk about shame. Yeah. And that sort of shame that people feel when they believe that somebody else sees them in as less than, or sees them as somehow not quite part of the team, or that it's a weakness of some kind. And whether it's the stigma is actually real, or whether the individual perceives it to be real, like if they're just making it up in their own head, well, then it exists for them in some way, shape, or form. The level of stigma that they're experiencing is enough to prevent them from reaching out. I did, and usually what's stopping them from reaching out and looking for some support and help is that sense of shame that I'm less than, or I'm wrong, or I'm weak, or I'm something like that. And I remember years ago in my training, being in a sort of a training program with an expert, a guy called Dr. Robert Lee. He's an expert on shame. And I remember asking him at the time, what's the opposite of shame? Obviously the opposite of happy is sad, etc., etc. I said, what's the opposite of shame then? And I was thinking, is it pride? And he said, no, it's actually belonging. So when we feel shame, or when we feel stigmatized, we're going to retreat into ourselves, and we isolate, or we hide, or we withdraw, and we don't seek the sort of help that we actually need. And to get yourself from there to seeking help requires an element of, well, it's actually vulnerability, but it's dressed up as courage, I think, because we're putting ourselves out in the line, and we're really saying, here I am, I'm injured, or I'm less than, and I'm needing some support and some help. And there are society itself seems to, on some level, we talk about, it's terrible, people should be able to reach out for more help, but yet at the same time, so many people in society will walk past homeless people, they fear them. We're kind of xenophobic, if you like, and we fear something we don't know or don't understand. Now, as we're recording this, we're coming up on Anzac Day. And a prime example of this comes up for me when I think about the reverence and respect and gratitude we have for veterans. Is some of the best in the world. I think the US do it as well, obviously, but we acknowledge and we respect and we commemorate them every year. And if a veteran is struggling with post-traumatic stress or some injuries from their active service, even more so. But as soon as a veteran starts to, we'll say, drink or take some drugs or gets sort of addicted to their pain medications, as soon as that happens, we start to, as a society, in many cases, start to look on that as being less than. Okay, so now they're a drunk, or they're a junkie, or and all they've done is resorted to a coping strategy that's going to get them through the day. But we've added this thing in now that they're sort of less than and they're dirty, and we, the media has to take some share of the blame for that. But we as individuals start to sort of fear somebody who's in that space, rather than having even more or greater concern and compassion for them. So that's what happens with society. We start to look at people differently because we don't maybe understand where they're at. And when we start to do that, that's when people are going to feel stigmatized.
Okay, so that's a really good point. You mentioned this xenophobic and this,
Yeah.
um, we sort of we walk past that homeless person, and is it because we're not tooled with how we could help them? We don't have that, education, that ability to be able to connect with that person, and then just, essentially listen, and talk to them, and just have a conversation. Is this where, I guess the problem is that we're just not trained, in our school system,
Yeah.
um, that we don't, hence we can't cope, and why our coping mechanism is to walk away.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think it is. That's a large part of it. I'm reminded as you say that there's a ton of research has been done around what are the elements of somebody sort of recovering from, we'll say, a mental health issue. What are the things that are likely going to support them? So when we talk about that, we talk about sort of efficacy of their recovery. Um, and I wish I could show you a pie chart on here, so you'll just have to imagine it. 40% of the likelihood of somebody recovering from a mental health issue is based around the supports that they've got in the community. So like their family, the workmates, the sort of local community. It could be their flatmates, it could be their friends, it could be, as I say, the work environment. So 40% of the likelihood of somebody getting better is predicated on that support. 30% is predicated on their sense of hope that they can get better. Now, of course, that 30% and that hope is going to be influenced by the support base that they've got around them. So if you add the two of those together, we're now looking at 70% of the likelihood of somebody recovering from a mental health issue before they've had any treatment, or before they've seen a doctor, before they've got a medication, or they've seen a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And the remaining 30% is split actually between the sort of therapeutic sort of relationship, if you like, that they develop with their mental health care team. And then 15% comes around the sort of medication they've got, or the therapy that they get. But we can see here when if we have the support of people around us and the belief that this can change, um, a hugely influenced ability to actually recover and get better. And I talk about that when I'm talking to organizations and training leaders up to be able to have these conversations, because that flows out into the general public. When somebody is upskilled in that and suddenly isn't afraid to sort of sit and have a conversation with somebody, that doesn't just happen in work. That flows out to their family, into their community as well, and it permeates, and everybody sort of gets the advantage of that. And we could even talk about suicide. And nothing scares us more than having to talk to somebody who's suicidal, but in actual fact, it's not that difficult. If you know what to say, the right things to say. And there's really only a couple of questions. I talk about that a lot as well. But in terms of somebody feeling some sense of shame or embarrassment around actually reaching out for help, it's magnified when they're in that space. It can be difficult enough at the best of time. But when they're in that space, when they're feeling less than, or feeling they might be judged, or feeling or abandoned or rejected in some way, shape, or form, it takes an enormous amount of courage to say, no, I'm going to push through this and I'm going to ask for help.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, the solution, or the
Mhm.
point of help is really, um, giving that person that sense of belonging, providing that, community, or and bringing them along,
Yeah.
and making them feel part of something bigger. Because I'm thinking that homeless person lying in the street, all as they see all day is people walking past them and not even acknowledging them.
Yeah.
And so that just, as you said, it just magnifies the shame within,
Yeah.
and so it amplifies their feeling. And I'm just thinking it's the same as the work colleague in the workplace. If they're feeling down, they're probably thinking, why doesn't anyone gather that I'm not my normal self today? Why isn't anyone coming up and asking me, is there anything wrong? And they're waiting for someone to approach them with that conversation. And because people just continue on with their day, they're feeling more shame and thinking, oh, it's just me, it's my problem, it's not no one else's. And that makes them, I guess, further withdraw and thinking, the problem is them. And so, I think it's really, it's a two-way street, isn't it? In the
Yeah.
sense that as much as the individual needs to find that courage within
Yeah.
and break the shame and come out of their shell, uh, the other side, the people that can help these people that are suffering from mental health, can help break down that barrier by approaching them and just simple, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
And creating that space. And it really is like, because I'm thinking the other thing that probably amplifies this in society is everyone's so busy with so much on their mind, running around, and that person that's feeling vulnerable and struggling
Mhm.
is thinking, I don't want to add to their already busyness and
Yeah.
create a problem for them to deal with.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. That's a huge problem, actually. This sense that I don't want to be a burden on anybody. Um, and look, the sad part of that, if you want to get into the neuroscience of connecting with each other, um, rather than actually being a burden on somebody, if in that situation, if I was to come to Anthony because I'm struggling and I really need Anthony's help, both Anthony and Mark sort of get a benefit from that interaction. Our dopamine systems are both fired up as a result of this. You know what I mean? And it's not, and it's not necessarily me being a burden on you. You may be very, very happy to help. Sometimes you can't, but at least you can listen. It's not that difficult. But we both get something out of, so the relationship or the interaction, if you like. And as you were speaking there, it reminded me, a great saying I heard the other day, that there's only one thing more exhausting than living with or struggling with a mental health issue, and that's trying to pretend that you don't have one. That's even harder. That's just so much harder. But that shame and that stigma often sort of makes us sort of wallow in that, if you like.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
much you got to have that awareness and acknowledgement that
Yeah.
you're struggling in order for the next step of in terms of healing journey to take
Yeah.
place.
That
Yeah,
sense of
yeah,
hope that you need, that
yes,
30% of the sense of hope. And there's a guy, Bessel van der Kolk, is a sort of expert in trauma. And he is a great line. He said, "Look, probably the number one, the primary issue around people's mental health is that, the best way forward is knowing that we belong somewhere and knowing that we're safe in the company of others. Because if we don't have that, then we're going to retreat further. Stigma gets greater. Talking about the homeless person, the people walking past them every day, and we've all done it. We've all been guilty of it because we fear it. Are they dangerous? And actually, they're not. 10 times more likely to be victims of violence than to sort of be the instigator of it. And so we need to understand, and if we're going to break the cycle of stigma, we have to normalize the conversation. We have to make it okay to not be okay. And we've there was an Australian of the year, Patrick McGorry, Dr. Patrick McGorry. He was asked recently, sort of what he felt people should understand about mental health, and he had a great line, and I hope I quote him correctly. But he said, so he was asked, so what should people know about mental health? And he said that it can and probably will happen to you, and it definitely has or already is happening to somebody very, very close to you. So it's that common, and yet it's still sort of unspoken about. I work with organizations, And some industry sectors have greater levels of mental health issues than others. I mean, there's the obvious ones like fire and rescue, police, ambos. But people in the financial sector, in the technology sector, construction, mining, they all have heightened levels of mental health. And up to 1 in 3 in an organization will experience a mental health issue this year if they're not already. And so when I'm talking to leaders in that space, I say, okay, so look at the person either side of you. If they seem okay, well, then statistically, you're the one who's going to have the mental health issue. If you're adamant you're okay, well, then one of them is hiding it really, really well. And you got to ask yourself why. Why are they hiding it? And it's because it's stigma. And because they don't feel like it's safe to actually come forward and reach out and say, I'm struggling here a bit, I need some help.
Because there's that element of, job security, right? They fear
Oh
that,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's probably one of the big drivers of why people hold back in the workplace is thinking, well, if they see I'm not coping with this job I'm doing, they'll take it away from me.
Yeah.
Or something that they'll lose something as a result of coming forward.
Next round of redundancies, I won't survive the next round of redundancies. And if I do ask for help, sometimes I identify by my job, and if I reach out and ask for help, then they'll take the work off me, and then what have I got? Or they'll give it to my competition in the workplace. You know what I mean? Jerry or Sally over here will take on my work while I recover, and if they do a better job of it, then I'm done. So I can't say anything. I'm just going to have to tough this out and make it to the end of the week or the end of the month, or until I can take some time off. And that is, that's the whole issue with burnout, etc., is when we don't deal with the issue. Sometimes it'll go away by itself, but if it's a chronic issue, or your workplace is such that there was a sort of a kudos to the sort of the amount of stress that we used to sort of endure. You know what I mean? We used to see it as a badge of honor. Some places still probably do. I'm not sure that it's, oh God, I'd hope it's it's diminishing, but it still actually occurs. So yeah, there is definitely that fear that I could be judged badly as a result of this. And look, that comes down to your leader. It comes down to your immediate manager. It comes down to the level of care that the organization has and where they are in the structure of looking after their people. But the progressive organizations know that there is a direct line between the mental health of your people and the performance of the organization. You pick any one of the KPIs that a business or a leader is measured by: productivity, profitability, performance, absenteeism, presenteeism. All of these are measured, are affected by the mental health of your people. Millennials and younger people in general value the reputation an organization has around caring for their employees. And just colorful posters and fruit bowls just doesn't cut it anymore. In fact, a lot of organizations will rely on mental health first aid and employee assistance programs as their sort of go-to, and that's their mental health strategy. But there was a time when that was okay, but it's just not enough anymore. I mean, look at the last year and a half we've been through. Um, Outsourcing it's just not enough, and leaders often just say, oh, look, go see HR about that, or have you run the EAP, and then divest themselves of the problem. But the best leaders today are adept at having those kind of conversations with their people around their mental health. You have to be. There's too much at stake, and it's much easier to maintain and keep your employees than it is to actually try and replace them with somebody else. And the progressive smart organizations recognize and see that.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that there needs to be, like, within these organizations, as you said, way more than just a fruit bowl and a banner and, talking about and speaking to mental health.
Yeah.
There needs to be systems in place, because I'm thinking in some of these situations, the mental health may be driven from the manager to like that relationship between the manager and the employee. And
Yeah.
that might be toxic. And that could be primarily where the struggle is. And unless that company has a process in place where this employee feels safe to step away and raise it with someone other than their manager who's creating the mental health issue. And
Yeah.
I can see how, these more established organizations might not, the newer ones probably, evolve with these processes and procedures in place, but some of these more established organizations, well behind the eight ball. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely they are. And look, I when I'm talking to anybody in that space, the analogy I use is the team captain running out onto the pitch. Now, he or she needs to know that the team is at peak performance. Nobody's limping, nobody's hiding an injury, nobody's misfiring, not following the game plan, etc. Anything that's going to slow the rest of the team down. It's not enough to have two first aid people on the sideline with a stretcher ready to run on and take somebody off and take them to the doctor or the physio or whatever. That's reactive. We're reacting to issues that have already sort of become entrenched now. And a team captain should have been able to spot that person was limping and not at their best. So that's the kind of analogy I use. And it's no good when somebody limps up to the captain and says, "Oh, I think I've sprained my ankle. I'll go see the physio." It's much more around, well, what can we do? How can we support you around this? How can we get you back playing as at your peak again as soon as we can? And what do we do to cover for you in the meantime? That's the analogy I use. And it sounds simple, but it actually doesn't happen. So mental health first aid, I'm not knocking this at all. Employee assistance programs, not knocking that at all, but it's just not enough anymore. If that's the basis of an organization's strategy, well, then they're shortchanging themselves. That's what's actually happening there. And they lose their people as a result. If you don't look after your people, some other company will. It's as simple as that.
And so, what do you suggest to listeners that might be, obviously a lot of listeners do go to work each day, and they may be noticing someone that's just not themselves. And you said, you mentioned that pie chart, which I'm keen to share in the show notes, actually. So I think
I'll do that. I'll
we
send
can
you that.
incorporate that pie chart in the show notes so people can refer to it.
Yep.
But 70%, as you mentioned, is that sense of belonging. And if we've all got responsibility to ensure that everyone has this sense of belonging. They're part of the community. They're part
Yep.
of the company or organization.
They're
Part of the
They're a valued team member. Simple.
Yeah. So, what do you suggest? First of all, we'll look at from the perspective of someone that's okay themselves. So they're not the one in three. There's two other or one other colleague that they know within the circle of three that's struggling. What can they do? They're not the manager. What can they do as a peer?
As a peer, look, and it's the same for the manager as it is the peer. Ask. We have a tendency, particularly leaders or managers, have a tendency to think, if I'm asked a question, I'm supposed to have the answer. So if somebody comes to me and says, "Look, I'm struggling, I need some support," you don't have to save them. You're not a chaplain, you're not a counselor, you're not there to rescue anybody. And I would strongly urge you to resist rescuing anybody, because if you're not in that sort of space yourself, struggling with anxiety or chronic stress, etc., anything that we as a lay person would recommend or suggest to someone who's struggling, they've probably already tried, and they're just going to see that as, oh, that was a waste of time. They don't know anything. We ask. It's that 70% I was talking about. The community support and our sense of hope. There's no treatment, there's no rescuing or saving in that 70%. It's just creating a psychologically safe space for someone to not be okay. And the best way to do that is to listen. What have they got to say? How can we help? How can we support you? That way you're empowering them in getting what they need, and they'll probably have a fair idea themselves of what they need, whether it's time off to go see a psych or get to see a GP, or can we make an appointment with the GP together? I'm a little bit nervous. So, whatever it is, anybody can do that. It doesn't need to be a leader or a manager, and it doesn't need to be HR who helps somebody through a situation like that. We just ask, quite simply, and listen. I can't imagine what you're going through, but it sounds awful. what can we do to help, and is there something we can do to support you while you're going through this? And that's, now if they say I need 2 weeks in Fiji, well, the business isn't going to support that, obviously, but what else can we do? Is there something I as a person, or the organization, do to support you around that? I think a lot of people are fearful that they're going to become dependent on me now, and I'm going to have to be listening to this every bloody day, and I'm going to get sick of it. That tends to not be the result. And again, you can draw a boundary around that yourself anyway. But it's listen, and that normalizes the conversation. That makes it easier then for somebody to kind of come forward. And if that's coming from the top down in an organization, or in a football team, or if it's, you're a pillar of society in some way, if you can talk about your struggle and kind of normalize the conversation like that, that makes it a lot easier. I talk about my own struggles around anxiety. I was misdiagnosed with depression when I was 10. It was actually anxiety. But back then, the medications and the treatments were kind of so similar that it didn't really matter all that much. But I worked my way through that, and then obviously burnout as a senior exec in an organization. So I'm comfortable talking about it, and talking about suicide and all of these things. Some people still are a bit nervous about it, but senior people in an organization, if you haven't struggled yourself, and let's face it, 50% of us will in the course of our working life. So if you haven't, as Pat McGorry said, it's either if it isn't already, then it will be happening to somebody close to you. So, and have the conversation around that. That normalizes. And when people hear it's okay to not be okay, they can reach out and look for support and help. That's how we break it.
Particularly if it's particularly if it's coming from that leader within the organization, that they're
or in society, or whatever,
yes.
wherever it is. Here's a good one for you and for your listeners and viewers. I was doing some advanced training in suicide prevention with a group of GPs sometime last year, and I remember asking them, how much of your work is based around mental health? And I think stress was the conversation at the time, but how much of your work is based around that? And they said about I don't know, 10-15%, something like that. And I said, so that's how many people present to you saying that they've got stress, or that I can't, I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or something like that. And they said, yeah. I said, yeah, but the question is, how much of your work is based around treating people who have a mental health issue, or are trying to cope with their stress levels? And the answer came back, and this will surprise most people, about 65-70%. That's a big number, isn't it?
Huge.
Right.
Massive.
And when you take the difference between the 10 and 15 to the 65 and 70, that gap in the middle are people who were either didn't know and just sort of said, I've stomach problems, or I can't sleep, or I'm getting angry all the time, all the way up to the people who, even talking to their GP, felt too stigmatized to be able to say, mentally I'm struggling, but that's a huge number.
Huge.
And I've had that since then. I've asked GPs in various times, about that statistic, and they said, yeah, it's about right. Yeah. So we're not alone,
Absolutely.
yeah. And we need to be able to just talk about it some more.
And
We've already, stigma itself is prevalent, and it's not just around mental health. We stigmatize people for, criminal records, skin color, there's a sort of a line between discrimination and stigma. And the way I talk about it, I said, discrimination does, but stigma sees. So we have laws that prevent discrimination, and rightly so. But until we have thought police, then you can't really legislate against stigma. You know what I mean? There's visible stigma and there's invisible stigma, and we stigmatize people, as I said, around, sexual orientation, skin color, religious beliefs. There's, any number of those, people can be made to feel less than. But the invisible stuff is the silent stuff, and it's actually the more harmful at the moment as well.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think you mentioned earlier in the podcast about the reliance on substances in order to deal
Yeah.
with it.
Mm.
And I can imagine a lot of this under the iceberg, not the
Yeah.
tip of the iceberg, but yeah, sitting there, underlying festing issues
Yeah.
around this stigmatization can drive people to substance abuse. And you mentioned that person, that then relies on alcohol. That and then we further see that as further shame on that person. That
Well, it's a
their
weakness because they've
weakness. Yeah.
resorted to that, That's, yeah, and that's how it's painted, and that's how we see it. And the war on drugs, I mean, it's just so antiquated. It hasn't worked. It's a health issue. It's not a criminal issue. And I think that, the tables are starting to turn a little bit on that. But it takes all of us to sort of break that mold and break that stigma, you know?
Yeah, because drugs are always seen as that escape from reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
And numbing
Yeah.
the how you're feeling, and yeah, trying to hoping it will take it away.
Yeah. That's it. The only problem is you can't pick and choose what you numb. You numb everything once you start using a substance.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and so, but that's, I mean, that was my journey when I was on antidepressants when I was younger. It took away the deep darkness, but I kind of lost that sort of joyous bit at the top, the sort of
Mm.
antithesis to it, if you like. But that was a sacrifice worth making, so that it didn't have to be down in the depths of the black hole, as it were. So you can't pick and choose what you know, unfortunately.
And
Yeah.
just on in terms of better, more sustainable outcomes in terms of helping people manage mental health.
Yeah.
We've talked about it from the peer noticing someone that doesn't look right, and how to approach that person that's not feeling well. Now, from the person that's not feeling well, what you got any tips there in order to help them just break out of this, this fear of shame and stigmatization and loss of job? Like, have you got some gems there that you could share in order to help that person to take that step forward to ask for help?
Yeah, two people I would tell you, go find these two people on YouTube. Look at Brené Brown, have a listen to what she's got to say, and find Dr. Kirsten Neff, Neff as well. She is a leading authority on self-compassion, because we need both. I mean, self-care, you'll know all about. You're a clinical nutritionist, and we just to support ourselves: sleep, diet, exercise, mindset. If we take care of those things, we're certainly on the road to a recovery, and we can do a lot in that space to sort of support ourselves. But sometimes, life is shit, and sometimes this is shit. So we need to also develop that sense of self-compassion, that it's okay to feel like this for a while, but we don't wallow in it, and we're going to help. And that's the point at when we need to reach out and know that we belong, and know that we're not going to be rejected or abandoned for feeling like this. But we have to develop that sense of self-compassion to know that it's okay to not be okay sometimes. I think they're probably the first two places I would go. So that's taken, we spend, I think we pay way more attention to our laptop and our mobile phone and our iPad battery than we do our own batteries, right? And I think if we start there, you're certainly on the road to self-care. But in terms of reaching out and asking for help, um, I think you just got to do it. There isn't a magic formula. I'd love to be able to say, here's the secret insider tip to it, but in actual fact, it's, seek out where you believe you belong. Reach out to your tribe and ask for it. I mean, it's amazing when you talk to families who have experienced or have witnessed or are part of a suicide, a suicidality. Um, the line is always, I've yet to meet a family that said, oh yeah, we saw that coming. Every single time it's geez, we had no idea. Or, yeah, we knew they were struggling and we talked about it, but they seem to get better. And unfortunately, when somebody who is suicidal starts to suddenly get better and has more energy, or they're kinder to other people, we see that as, oh, they're turned the corner, they're actually getting better. But that's actually a red flag to me. That tells me that they're making plans, or they do have a strategy in place. and so we need to sort of be just connected and mindful of people. It's okay to ask somebody how they are. You don't say, are you okay? I mean, we do have Are You Okay Day, but even the Are You Okay people recognize that that's not actually the question to ask because it's closed. If I said, Anthony, are you okay? You're going to say 80% of the time you go, yeah, I'm fine. And you might reach out. But if I said, Anthony, how are you going this week? Or, how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? Where are you at? Tell me. Because I'm concerned. I've noticed that, you haven't been catching up for lunch with us, or you haven't been coming out on the weekends. A question like that, I'm concerned, so I'm asking you. It's very hard to be stigmatized around that when somebody's showing an element of empathy and care.
Absolutely, because you're acknowledging that you've noticed them. So, you've observed certain behaviors that just not them. And you're not acknowledging that to the person so they can say, oh, well, this person obviously cares because they've been looking out for me and they're just bringing that to my attention. And it sort of really opens up that pathway for them to say, yeah, you're right. I just
Yeah.
haven't been great lately. And then, then you could ask, well, what's going on? And they
Yeah.
could then, yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And look, there's a science behind how you ask the question. And we talk about using I statements. And that's something that when I'm training leaders, we work quite hard on that because we have a tendency to not use the word I. We'll say, you've been a bit of a cranky pants, Anthony, lately. Are you all right? You're going to respond, yeah, I'm fine. You know, but it's Anthony. I've noticed that just in recent times, you're not quite yourself. I'm just checking in. What's happening? How are you doing?
Yeah.
Much more
Yeah.
likely to go, you noticed it. Yeah, I'm shit, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But there's that, it's coming from me. So it's
Yes.
not, I'm not accusing you of anything. This is what I've
Yes.
noticed. This is what I'm
Yes.
feeling. And it's, it's the same sort of science when if we had to have a confrontation,
Hmm.
it would start with sort of what I've noticed and how it's affecting me.
Hmm.
Because you can't then tell me that I'm not feeling that or that I haven't
Mm.
noticed that, right? It's mine and I own it and I'm sharing it with you. So it's a much safer way of doing it. But we do, I talk to people all the time and they say, well, when you're down, yeah, you should sort of probably look after yourself. And again, who's this you you're talking about? Me. So rephrase it, and when I'm down, I should look after myself. Well, yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, but use the I language, own it.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah. So there's a huge power in that I.
I really like it, and I like
Mm,
that fact that rephrasing that "Are you okay?" to a more open question
yeah.
to really get a more deeper response, as opposed to just closing you down, and then you're
Yeah.
thinking, oh yeah, that person's okay. They're saying all is good.
Yeah.
But
Mm,
the fact that you draw it to I've noticed a change in behavior recently. And as you said, they can't say because that's what you've observed. You mean you might have incorrectly observed them,
that's
or
it.
got the wrong impression, but at least they feel recognized by you and noticed by you, and that gives them a sense of belonging, which you mentioned is so important.
Yeah. We're not wagging a finger at anybody, but we're just sort of saying, I care enough about you to check in. It's
Yeah.
very hard to be offended by that.
Uh,
And
uh,
look, it's a similar question with suicide. If you thought somebody was suicidal, you're not going to say, you're not going to do anything stupid now, are you? Because obviously the answer to that is no, of course not. But it's not going to change anything. But I'm really concerned. I'm worried. You know, are you thinking about taking your own life? To somebody who is suicidal, that's probably the best question they've been asked in the last year. You know, and if they say yeah, well, or no, do you have a plan on doing it? And you find your own language around that, but they're not pariahs. That these people are struggling. They're going through a challenging time, and if they hear somebody is there, willing enough to just check in with them, that might be all anybody needs to sort of shift in some way. So
and
it's,
that
yeah, I've noticed, or I'm concerned. It's me.
and that question you raised earlier was, how can I help you? What
Yeah,
can I do to help you? And,
Yeah.
so it really opens them up to saying, or just saying, well, yeah, you're here to help me. Well, yeah,
Mhm.
I could do with some help. And this is where I could do with some help. So, yeah. So, Mark, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation about,
Me too,
just.
Anthony. Thank you.
You're welcome. You've just given such great insight to me personally. I've learned a lot, and no doubt the listeners have, about how to better approach mental health, how to destigmatize it, and what the individual, the listener, the viewer can do to help out, a colleague, or if they're the manager, to help out an employee, and to better support that person's well-being and to make them feel part of belonging to a community, an organization, a bigger cause, part of the family, to really help them along their mental health journey. Because as you said, life's full of ups and downs,
Yeah.
and it's part of life, isn't it?
Yeah. And if we know we belong and we know we matter and we're valued, then that's probably that's the most important bit.
Absolutely, because and is that because I had my last question for you was any concluding words, but I think you've taken them out of my mouth.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Look, that's it. That's it. To know that we belong, to know we're valued, and to know we matter. That's really important. Loneliness is, I mean, we could go another hour on loneliness, but it's a huge issue in society today. And it's the same answer for that, to know we belong, and we do somewhere. But it's up to us to be on the front step and to reach out if we're feeling it, or if we're feeling in some way that we need help. We need to be okay to not be okay, and that comes down to your tribe or your community making it so. Yeah.
Awesome words there. And yes, I'll take you up on that extra episode, or part two of this episode, on we could talk about loneliness, because I think it's a
Yeah.
very important subject. And certainly the stats out there, the studies are showing that, we have a growing population that is feeling more lonely.
Yeah.
And that's only going to, as feel, that they don't belong to something,
Mm.
and create more mental health issues.
Absolutely. It shortens your life about the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
incredible.
that's a big statement. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So thanks again, Mark, for sharing all your expertise with our listeners today. For the listeners, if you like the episode, if you think there's a lot of value in there, please share it with your colleagues, your friends, your family, to better help their mental health. Certainly leave a review, because that will help this episode get to more people. And stay tuned for more insightful episodes of Me and My Health Up.